like you mentioned, there's not a need for carbohydrates necessarily, but there is a need for biodiversity in the gut, and different bacteria in the gut react differently to bacteria and prebiotic fiber that comes in. So my concern with the carnivore diet is you are essentially removing all of the prebiotic fiber that could potentially come in. And I wonder about long-term effects if we're going to see reduction in the diversity in the gut, or potentially like changes in enzymes or things that we need for digestion. Is that something that you've run into at all, or that you would be concerned about?
Yeah, so I chatted a lot with Dr. Michael Ruscio on this topic, who's one of my go-to guys about gut health. And I mean, we chat a lot about gut health in general. So gut problems, what happens is generally the treatment protocol is to remove all fiber and not add more fiber in. And so that's one of the reasons why I think short-term carnivore diet works so well for people, is that it's essentially a gut reset program. And so you're removing all fiber and you're correcting a lot of imbalances or overgrowth of bacteria that you have in your gut. And so I think that a lot of people, yes, we have these ideals that biodiversity in the gut is good and all these different things, but we really do not know anything about the gut where we're at right now. We're still naming species, and we're still in a phase where we just generally don't know that much. We know some stuff might be good. We don't know in what proportion. We know what for what population. And so there's something where I think that we kind of put the cart ahead of the horse, and we don't really know what we're talking about yet. And this is, Dr. Ruscio is the same way. He knows how to deal with what he sees. He's, again, the person that I think has read the most research about this than anything. He just had a book come out that is phenomenal dealing with this stuff. And I think that fiber generally, and this might be controversial, but is a little overrated. And I think that you actually can get a lot of stuff from animal parts. So there's things called proteoglycans in cartilage and in skin that your body can actually use as prebiotic and probiotic fibers. And so that's something too that can be incorporated into to see with the microbiome, how it handles it. I've just seen so many reports, people long-term, 2, 3, 5, 10 years on this type of diet, clear up digestive problems, clear up any kind of gut problems, and actually thrive on this long-term. That, it's not that I think that, again, it's 100% necessary. It's just, you have to ask the question of, is fiber really necessary to the degree that we think it is? And do we really know enough about the gut microbiome to say, plants are the only ways to get this type of fiber and the only way to balance a gut microbiome? I mean, we've studied, in the way we get the conclusion that, more diversity is good or better is from people generally eating a standard American diet, and not really even paleo diet, let alone ketogenic diet or carnivore diet. So gut microbiome for somebody who eats only meat, maybe they need less because a lot of the meat actually gets absorbed in the small intestine. You have no need for it in the large intestine anymore. And so, yes, there are a lot of studies showing that you need microbiome diversity for regulation of mood and regulation of hunger and all these different hormones and all that stuff like that. But I mean, the most important thing is that you have high mucosal integrity and high amount of bacteria on top of that mucosa in the gut. And I think what happens is a lot of times when people overeat fiber, they actually, and overeat inflammatory foods especially, is that they start breaking down that mucosal layer and getting into the gap lining of the actual gut and breaking that down, and more things get into your bloodstream than needs to be. So, I mean, I think it's a much bigger story than just, eat more fiber equals more gut bacteria, and more gut bacteria equals more health. And so I think it's a way more complicated picture than we have to paint. And I think that we're not even close to answering that question yet. So again, I remain skeptical. I don't really know the answer. I don't think anybody has the data to know the answer, but I think we're really getting ahead of ourselves as far as gut health goes.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a great points. And I think you're right. We're only starting to barely touch the tip of the iceberg when it comes to gut health. And I'm really excited for what the next few decades hopefully will hold for research. But I am curious, so as a follow-up to that, what about people who do this for an extended period of time and then do eventually reintroduce vegetables? Do you think there's they could potentially lose the ability to digest that correctly? And also, I totally agree with you as far as I don't think we need refined carbohydrates, and certainly not sugar, and that most of these things are overconsumed. But it seems like even looking at the keto diet or the paleo diet especially, there is a strong historical prevalence of people eating vegetables, usually green vegetables in small amounts, and like a large diversity of that, and both for the micronutrients, and then obviously that is a type of fiber as well. So I'm curious your take on those, because like you said, it's a controversial topic, but I'm excited to go deep on this.
Okay, so can you break those questions down for me, just kind of one by one, so we can tackle them?
Yeah, so the first one, let's just tackle, do you think someone who's done the carnivore diet, for instance, long term, will have trouble reintroducing vegetables at some point if they decide to?
So just like with any type of nutrition, if you eliminate something entirely, which again, I'm not advocating for, and I don't say that this is the best way to go about nutrition, I think, again, carnivore diet might be a tool for some people for some reasons. And so that's why I think it may be helpful. I'm not saying that everybody should be doing this, but even when you switch to a ketogenic diet for the first time, you have certain receptors in your cells that use fats in a certain way and control them into mitochondria that have basically been unused for your entire life that start getting turned on, and that might take 4 to 8 weeks to start using ketones as energy. And so the same thing goes with all food. And so if you eliminate carbohydrates entirely and you eliminate all fiber entirely, and even if you eliminate meat entirely, so if you eliminate meat for a long period of time, your body stops producing certain acids in your stomach that help break down the meat. And so your body doesn't want to waste energy dealing with stuff that it doesn't deal with. And so if you do that, yes, you might have a transition period where adding stuff back in, you might need to take it a little slow, but it's not like your body loses the ability long term or forever to be able to process these foods and use them as an energy source. Your body is very adaptable, and it's not like it's going to just completely forget and have an amnesia permanently about how to handle certain foods. So I don't think that this is a relevant concern. I think with anything, when you go extreme, your body adapts to extreme, and it has to then adapt to moderation over a long period of time as well. And I think that you see this in energy systems, you see this in food choices, you see this across the board. So it's not something that I'm worried about. Can it happen? Yes, but I think that it's less of a concern than people make it out to be.
Interesting. Definitely got it. And I know for me and my side of research, I've come around, especially in the last couple of years, to the idea that there's obviously so many different dietary ideas and systems people use. And to some degree, I wonder if, like, what if we're all right, at least a little bit? Like, what if all of these things have their time and their place, but it's finding out for all of us the thing that actually is going to work for us? And like you said, there's genetic components, there's personalization here. So no one recommendation is going to work for everyone. But back to the earlier point on vegetables, we do know just anthropologically, there is a really long history of humans eating either greens or different kinds of vegetables that were found in nature and easy to forage. So I'm curious your take on those within the paradigm of a keto diet or a paleo diet.
Oh, yeah. And this is, again, so your question on variance, I think you asked a little bit about that as well. Like, we had a lot of variance. Why would we skip out on that? I totally agree with that point. I think that a lot of human nutrition and just human life in general, people become healthier with variance. And so if anybody is curious more about this subject, I would read Nassim Taleb's Anti-Fragile to kind of dive really deep into the book about randomness. But I think that incorporating randomness is the most important thing. And so that's why, when people look at fasting, for example, intermittent fasting every single day for 8 years, all right, yeah, it might not be a good idea, especially for women. If they look at about being vegan only for 10 years, probably not great. If they look at being a carnivore over long term, maybe we'll find this as well. I don't think that humans ever had a time where they were able to have the same amount of nutrition day in and day out for years and years and years at a time. I think that mixing it up is a really good thing. And then that comes to fasting, that comes to food choice, that becomes to macronutrient ratios, that comes to metabolic flexibility, the whole spectrum. And I think that includes having meat, but also having vegetables as well. And so when we look at kind of what vegetables are and how they provide nutrition to the body, it's less that vegetables in plants in general provide micronutrition or vitamins and minerals. Meat, hands down, if you look at any kind of nutrition chart, wins that hands down, whether that be organ meats is obviously at the top of that spectrum. And then kind of second to that is just animal meat. And then way below that are spices and herbs. And below that are vegetables, for example. However, what they do provide that meat does not is a lot of hermetic stressors. And so, for instance, everybody knows, like, just to give an example, turmeric, right, great anti-inflammatory. It's because turmeric is a little bit of a stress to the body. So the body has to react to that in increasing a lot of immune system reaction. So that way your body, if it comes into more turmeric later, it does not become overwhelmed by it. And so the same thing, but if you go out and do a bunch of squats and you become sore on it, that's a stressor. You're not adding to your body. Your body freaks out. It does not want to have that stress again. So it makes you stronger. Plants work a lot in the same way. And that's why I don't think that anybody removing plants has it figured out totally. That's like saying that, workouts make me sore and I can get overtrained by running 8 marathons a day. Therefore, I'm never going to move again. We still want a lot of stress with movement. We still want your body to move. We still want a lot of that baseline. I think that vegetables and plants in general provide a lot of the same thing. And so if you look at books like, Plant Paradox and all, like, people talking about, plant toxins and all this stuff, again, we don't want to put that in a bucket and go so extreme to say that you should never have that stuff. We should look at it and say, like, okay, what is the utility of that? And I think that just like working out, we having a stressor for it and adapting to it is a really, really good thing. Does it make sense to eat 15 salads a day Probably not. If we're getting those stressors on a cellular level over and over and over again, probably not a great idea. Do I think it'd be good to eliminate entirely over the long term? I do not think so. I think that what you mentioned about variability and randomness is 100% how humans have probably adapted over the last couple million years, and probably how they should be approaching nutrition for the next couple million years. If that makes any sense. That was kind of a long ramble.
That's such a good explanation. And I think you're so right. To me, what both history and current scientific data really back up is the idea that we do need, like you said, a ton of variation and different stressors at different times. And if you want to look at just history alone, people didn't always have the ability to eat all the time. So sometimes they had to fast by default. They certainly weren't eating strawberries in the middle of winter. And, they weren't eating necessarily potatoes in the middle of summer. They only could eat what was available at certain times. And now we do have complete availability of every food and every macronutrient at all times. But that isn't what we've historically had the ability to do. So I'm curious, since we touched on it a little bit and you mentioned intermittent fasting, I'd love to get your take on fasting, both intermittent fasting and then water fasting and some of the other types of more extreme fasting.
Yeah, so this is another thing that people don't realize, that fasting is a stress. And so if you're somebody who goes to work and you're running out the door and you're grabbing lunch and you maybe not eating in a day and you're stressed about bills and your kids are yelling at you and all this different stuff, and then you go run to the gym afterwards and do a stressful CrossFit workout and then rush home and then have no time before you go to bed, you should probably not be doing fasting. And I don't think anybody talks about this. I think that minimizing allostatic stress load is the overall stress component that a human has to deal with. If your other stress units are high, I think it is a very, very good idea. And so for example, for me, very personally, in the beginning of the year, I moved from one city to split time between two. I basically, my roles at my company are changing rapidly. The company was growing like crazy. I was hiring stuff. I had a lot of personal things going on. My level of stress was insanely high. I was still trying to max it out, doing crazy workouts and fasting and all this other stuff because I thought it would give me all these edges. When I eliminated fasting, I just ate like a normal human being and ate 3 times a day. I minimized my workouts and I started doing more gymnastic stuff instead of really hard, intense strength training workouts. I felt incredible. I felt like I adapted extremely quick to my environment. Whether if I was trying to push the stress level on this stuff on and on and on, I think that it would have been a rough year for me, and I probably wouldn't be able to have this conversation right now. And so I think that looking at fasting as a stress, and if you can handle that, and you feel like you're at kind of like a good baseline level of nutrition and health, okay, now we can talk about adding fasting in. So I want to get that out of the way, where people do not understand that they may be eating like crap, and they don't really have any type of sleep under control. They don't have meditation going on. They don't have stress management going on, and they start adding in fasting. I just don't think it's a good tool to use at that point in time. However, if you have all that stuff dialed in, I think it can be an effective tool for a lot of different reasons. I feel generally, and why I do it is that, so the way I approach it in intermittent fasting is that I just generally do not eat if I'm not hungry, and I eat when I'm hungry. Because I'm on a ketogenic diet, that looks like 1 to 2 meals a day generally. And so then if I wake up and I'm not hungry, maybe I had a really fatty dinner the night before, I just do not eat until I'm hungry. A lot of that time is extended because I work really intensely and I get kind of into the zone and just kind of forget to eat, which is a side effect of a ketogenic diet as well. That's how I approach it generally. As far as extended fasts, I try to get at least 2 to 3, 5 to 7 day fasts in per year. There's too much evidence out there suggesting the benefits of long-term fasts regarding clearance of old cells, increase in mitochondrial biogenesis, resetting of hormones, all this different stuff. And the downside to me is nothing. The downside is just you don't have mouth pleasure for 5 to 7 days. Like you just miss out on food for 5 to 7 days. If I had even potential benefits long-term from a downside of essentially nothing, I'm going to take that risk a couple of times a year and not flinch at it. I've done it a few times now. It's really not that big of a deal for me. And so that's why I tried to sneak that in. When we're looking at intermittent fasting, which is generally people, eat less in one day and then they eat less in the next day. You just don't get the same amount of benefits if you were to restrict fasting for a long period of time. And so I like to think about it instead of intermittent fasting and fasting. I like to think about it as time restricted feeding or eating versus fasting. So fasting, I think, is longer term. We actually start kicking on autophagy, and you're looking at maybe an extended 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 day fast rather than intermittent fasting, which I think should be just time restricted eating or time restricted feeding. which a lot of great people are doing a lot of research